Forget everything you thought you knew about ancient Europe. 3,500 years ago, the Minoans ruled the Mediterranean with 5-story palaces and sophisticated plumbing systems that wouldn't be matched for millennia. Then, in a single night, they vanished. For a century, historians painted them as a peaceful paradise, a civilization without warfare, devoted only to art and beauty. But now, ancient skeletons and volcanic ash are revealing a very different story. Just how dark was the truth? The answer lies within the labyrinth of Knossos. The latest discoveries have completely changed that picture. The Minoans were not complacent, isolated islanders. They were international networkers, connected to the surrounding world by the sea, not separated by it. They were the Keftiu. In the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, archaeologists found the tomb of Rekhmira, a high official. A painting in the tomb depicts delegations from all over bringing offerings. Among them, one delegation is called the Keftiu people. What they brought, luxurious pottery, cosmetics, sophisticated metalware, we instantly recognize as Minoan. And here is what must change your thinking. Keftiu is the name the Bronze Age Cretans called themselves. Rather than an isolated European nation, we should think of Crete as a northwestern extension of the land we now call the Middle East. Their foundation was not Greek, but immigrant. Around 7000 BCE, people from Turkey and the Levant moved in and settled permanently. They brought with them wheat, goats, and domesticated flora and fauna. And most importantly, they brought the secret of bronze. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, was the microchip of the Minoan age. It allowed them to create everything, from precise stone-cutting tools to long saws. But there was one major problem. Crete had no copper. Without a steady supply of copper and tin, their civilization risked reverting to the Stone Age. There was only one choice: take everything to the sea. They had to become the bravest sailors of the ancient world. But did you know that the boats they used to build Europe's first civilization looked like a flimsy, giant kayak? We often think of the sophistication of the ancient world through colossal pyramids or sculpted statues. But in Minoan Crete, greatness is found in the extremely practical details, things we take for granted today: clean water and sanitation. The mere existence of a flushing toilet at Knossos was not just a small convenience. It is evidence of a superior technical vision, a profound understanding of architecture and hydraulics. Consider the contrast. At a time when mighty empires like Babylon or Egypt still primarily relied on bringing water from rivers or wells, the Minoans were building sophisticated terracotta pipes, precisely fitted, running through the floors and walls like a public circulatory system. They didn't just pipe water in, they also had effective rainwater drainage and waste management systems. What does this tell us about them? First, it speaks to a priority placed on health and well-being. A society that invests in sanitation and clean water management is often a society with abundant resources, high population concentration, and an effective administrative apparatus concerned with communal welfare. Second, it reflects power and prestige. The control and distribution of clean water within an often arid palace environment was the ultimate symbol of authority. The advanced water system not only served important religious rites, but also separate bathing and living quarters for the elite. When an official or merchant entered Knossos, they would immediately see the difference and the technological superiority, a strong statement about the caliber of the Minoan world. They transformed what was merely a survival necessity into an art of engineering. The combination of delicate wall frescoes and complex underground piping shows a civilization that had reached the peak of both aesthetics and practicality. The dazzling civilization of the Minoans is not just found in the dolphin paintings. It lies right beneath your feet in every piece of clay piping, revealing how sophisticated and modern their life was, even if we cannot read a single word of their language. But it didn't stop there. Alongside the secret of bronze, the Minoans brought a dazzling civilization with them, characterized by their incredibly sophisticated plumbing system. In the minds of the ancient Greeks, Minos must have had a mighty fleet of warships to deal with pirates and threatened neighbors. But the Minoan sea power in the Bronze Age was built on incredibly small ships. They were just simple sailboats, made of a fragile cypress wood lattice with a fabric hull. Just as I said, a giant kayak. It was these weak vessels that sailed into often hostile waters, laden with goods for exchange. They didn't just survive, they created a brand. They transformed ordinary objects into unmistakably Minoan objects. They pioneered high-end ceramics, cosmetics, and decorative metalware. In other words, the Minoans did for Bronze Age products what the Japanese later did for electronics. They were masters of design and quality, but not quantity. But there was one unique luxury product that cemented the reputation of this island's superb craftsmanship. And it started at the bottom of the sea. That was purple. If bronze was the muscle and sinew of the civilization, purple symbolized glamour, status, and wealth. It was simply one of the most coveted commodities in the ancient world. The Romans called this color Tyrian purple, the color of clotted blood. It was reserved for heroes and emperors. This precious purple was extracted from an ugly mollusk, the murex snail, a scavenging sea snail. At the port of Knossos, archaeologists found hundreds of murex shells dating back to the early Minoan period. Many shells had a small, precise hole. This suggests a chilling truth. This was not the work of individual fishermen. When these creatures are uncomfortably close together, it's a sign of large-scale farming. Mass production. Imagine it took up to 12,000 murex to create enough dye for the border of one coat. This was luxury to the point of madness. Thanks to this royal purple, the Cretans became the leading brand in the luxury segment of East Mediterranean trade. But to get bronze and purple, they had to accept horrific risks. The sea didn't just bring profit, it brought disaster. Imagine a wealthy Minoan merchant who has just traded a shipment of purple textiles for precious copper ingots. He stands on his flimsy cypress boat, heading toward the port of Moklos, where migrants from Turkey brought the knowledge of bronze 5,000 years ago. He feels like the richest man in the world. Suddenly, a jolt. Not a typical earthquake. It was a roar from the depths of the earth. It happened on the island of Thera, 70 miles away. A volcano was burning itself up in preparation for its grand finale. And when that volcano erupted, it didn't just create a cloud of ash that obscured the sun. It created the largest explosion humanity had ever witnessed. It created a tsunami, a great flood taller than any wave ever seen on the Mediterranean. In an instant, the merchant's boat was torn apart. The copper sank to the seabed. The purple was swept away. The entire structure and foundation he believed in was swallowed by the ocean. The secret of purple was luxury, but the secret of Knossos was precariousness. Those beautiful palaces brought the Minoans wealth and a flush toilet, but could they protect them from the wrath of the bull god? The appearance of the mysterious and extraordinary palaces about 1,000 years after the advent of bronze was a major milestone. Knossos, Malia, Phaistos, Zakros. They were not fortresses. They were political, religious, administrative, and economic centers. They were places for feasting, for social gatherings. They also served as storage for agricultural produce. Evans was captivated. He saw brightly colored frescoes, giant storage jars. He found a replica of a throne, and he was particularly surprised by the modernity of these Minoans. At Knossos, they even had the first plumbing system in Europe, even a flush toilet. Imagine, in the 2nd millennium BCE, they had technology so advanced it amazed and delighted the first excavators. They might have stolen the idea. Some researchers suggest that the Cretans may have engaged in architectural espionage in Egypt. Knossos' famous labyrinth, in fact, might be a Minoanized version of a complex Egyptian funerary enclosure. After Evans found the palace, he constructed the image of the peaceful Minoan, a utopian society with no signs of violence. But was this true? On one hand, they left very few depictions of warfare, but on the other, archaeologists were seduced by the idea of a utopia. If you look closely at those supposedly peaceful images, like the male athletes hunting bulls, you can see it as a celebration of beauty or a darker side. These could be male bodies trained for violence. They hunted and wrestled with bulls. This is where Evans's colonial-era biases may have intervened. Evans was a man of an imperial power, a wealthy man. He wanted to prove that Crete was part of Europe, not the Orient. Therefore, depicting them as a primitive, yet completely peaceful, unarmed civilization created a romanticized picture. Some critics argue that this had racist premises, aiming to create a false contrast between the serenity of early Europe and the bellicosity of other civilizations. In reality, these palaces were built on earthquake country. Crete was the land trampled by the bull god Poseidon. The first Knossos Palace was destroyed. But this speaks to the resilience of the Cretans. Within 50 years of the disaster, they rebuilt new palaces, bigger and better than the old ones. Another myth Evans helped shape was the rise of women with the idea of a matriarchal system. While the idea of a matriarchy is completely based on outdated 19th century evolutionary theories, what is certain is that Minoan women held an extremely important position. We have the snake goddess. Priestesses could own land. They had high status, especially in the religious sphere, and they were clearly central to the textile industry. Textiles were an important export. The textile industry was core to the palace's operation. The organizers of this industry, the women, certainly had very high status. They rebuilt the palaces. They rewove their lives with the most precious threads. But they did not know that the next disaster would not be an earthquake. It would be the downfall of the gods, and it would create a desperation so severe that people would eat each other. Minoan was a civilization shaped by the sea, and because of the sea, it faced catastrophe. The sea brought bronze and purple, but it also contained a long, simmering wrath. The horrific disaster that engulfed the Minoan civilization began 70 miles north of Crete on the island of Thera, modern Santorini. The people of Thera were not Minoan, but they were deeply influenced by Minoan culture. They were perfect trade intermediaries. But around the middle of the 2nd millennium BCE, they began to feel Mother Nature's rage. First a shake, then a worrying black streak spread across the northern horizon, ash and poisonous fumes. The Thera volcano was building up strength for its finale. When the final eruption occurred, it must have been as terrible as an exploding atomic bomb. Its fiery light would have been visible from the mountaintop sanctuaries of Crete. Tsunamis struck Crete. Archaeologists have revealed that the combination of seaborne disasters was the cause of the Minoan civilization's eclipse. Ash clouds obscured the sun, suffocating fields, poisoning water sources, choking plants and livestock. Bronze Age agriculture was severely affected. East Crete was the worst hit. And then the desperation began. In a ruined house near Knossos, archaeologists did not find treasure or luxurious pottery. they found something more terrifying. They found the skeletons of at least 4 children. The chilling thing is, the bones had precise cut marks, exactly like the way the Minoans butchered sheep. Some bone fragments, along with snail shells, a sign of meager food, were found in a cooking pot. The truth was clear. When the gods were silent and the hunger became unbearable, people resorted to cannibalism. This was no longer the peaceful, utopian society of Arthur Evans. This was a civilization tearing itself apart in the shadow of disaster. These findings force us to see a completely different aspect of the Minoans. After the terrible eruption subsided, some Minoans tried to continue their old lives. But the Thera disaster inflicted a wound deeper than the cuts on the bones. It was the betrayal of the gods. And that betrayal would lead to a religious holy war unprecedented in Europe. After the double disaster, earthquake, and Thera, the rebuilt palaces only survived for a short time. The civilization did not die immediately, but trust did. For centuries, goddesses, priestesses, and the snake goddess figure who could own land had dominated religious life. But when disaster struck, the protection of the goddesses seemed to have failed. This is when a new god began to emerge. An alien male god, a figure symbolizing the rise of male power in a time of chaos. Kuros. But this religious shift did not happen peacefully. At one temple, archaeologists found a precious Kuros statue. The statue was completely destroyed. Who did this? Who tore off the limbs, sliced the face, and even castrated such a valuable deity? This was not typical looting. This was an act of religious resistance. The strongest hypothesis is the women did it. In a society where women and goddesses had high status and could dominate the spiritual sphere, the appearance of Kuros, a male god, was an insult. When their goddesses failed to control the earthquakes, the bull god Poseidon, and prevent Thera, the faith of a segment of the Minoan people rose with fanatical instinct. The destruction of the Kuros statue was the final blow of the betrayed women to the emerging god, a declaration that they would not accept the replacement of power. Minoan did not collapse because of an earthquake. They tore themselves apart in Europe's first holy war. This internal weakening paved the way for the real enemy. Soon after, the Mycenaean Greeks took advantage of the situation to control Crete. Minoan culture was overshadowed. The script disappeared. For most civilizations, this is when we see apocalyptic scenes, fire, blood, and destruction. But for the Minoans, the end came quietly, like a cold mist settling. The civilization did not completely vanish. Some Minoans, the last descendants, were forced to take refuge in remote mountain areas, like Keftiu. They continued to make pottery. They continued to visit the old religious sites. The refugees at Keftiu must have been very, very scared. They stayed up there for 100 years before daring to return to the lowlands. We are all disappointed when a civilization ends, but think about it. The people who were constantly heavily taxed by the Knossos Palace, perhaps they didn't mind. Perhaps their lives were better off not being part of this overly complicated civilization. The Minoans were a failed civilization. They were an experiment in living. They created amazing art, a complex writing system, the undeciphered linear A, and plumbing systems. But in the end, life on Crete became too complicated. Minoan civilization is the most bizarre civilization we have on European soil. As the writer Rose Macaulay once said, the Minoans have become part of our mental landscape, but they still retain a monstrous mystery and strangeness. They are like a dream. You think you remember them, and then they vanish again. But precisely because of this, the journey of discovery and deciphering of the first civilization of Western Europe truly never ends. We have been on a long journey together, from the labyrinth of the Minotaur to the purple streaks of luxury, and finally to the desperation in the mountains. If you feel that the secrets of this ancient world deserve further exploration, Please support us by leaving a comment below. Let me know what surprised you most about the Minoans. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next part where we will delve into the unsolved mysteries. Thank you and see you next time.